path of the tornado.
The Shawshank Redemption wasn't just a prison drama that flopped at the box office. It was a masterpiece forged through rejection, desperation, and a director's stubborn refusal to compromise his vision. Behind those gray walls and crushing hopelessness lay a production plagued by maggot-infested sets, an actor who nearly quit before filming began, and a studio that wanted absolutely nothing to do with the project. What you saw on screen, that flawless tale of hope and friendship, masks one of Hollywood's most improbable journeys from failure to phenomenon. Here are 20 weird facts about the Shawshank Redemption that reveal the brutal reality behind cinema's most beloved redemption story. And stick around for the bonus fact. At the end, it involves a decision made in under 2 minutes that changed film history forever. Let's dig our tunnel through the walls of movie magic. Every major studio rejected the script. Rob Reiner wanted to direct The Shawshank Redemption himself. He'd already turned Stephen King's Stand By Me into gold, and he was willing to pay $3 million out of his own pocket for the rights. But Frank Darabont refused. Not because the offer wasn't tempting, but because Darabont had been writing spec scripts for years, living in poverty, watching his dreams defer. This was his chance. Castle Rock Entertainment eventually took the gamble, but only after every major studio in Hollywood passed. Warner Brothers? Pass. Universal? Not interested. The script that would eventually earn 7 Oscar nominations couldn't get a single major studio to bite. Darabont's stubborn belief in his own vision meant choosing uncertainty over guaranteed money, and that decision haunted him throughout the production. What audiences didn't know was that the film they'd come to worship almost never got made because nobody believed in it. The prison was about to be demolished. The Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield wasn't just a filming location. It was a condemned building literally scheduled for demolition. The production designers walked through crumbling corridors where actual prisoners had lived, worked, and sometimes ended their lives. Asbestos lined the walls, rats nested in the corners. The building had been abandoned for years, and the crew had exactly 18 months to shoot before the wrecking balls arrived. They didn't renovate it, they couldn't afford to. Instead, they worked around the decay, incorporating the genuine deterioration into the film's visual language. When you see those oppressive gray walls closing in on the inmates, you're seeing a structure that was already dying. The reformatory's dark history, including multiple prisoner deaths and notorious brutality, seeped into every frame. The production was essentially filming inside a monument to human suffering, and that authenticity permeates every scene. Morgan Freeman wasn't the first choice for Red. Red was written as a middle-aged Irishman with red hair, hence the name, Clint. Eastwood was considered. Harrison Ford was discussed. Gene Hackman was in the running. Frank Darabont had a list of white actors before Morgan Freeman's name even appeared. But once Freeman read the script, everything changed. His audition wasn't dramatic or showy. He simply inhabited Red with such natural authority that Darabont couldn't imagine anyone else. The decision required one small script change, keeping the joke about Red's name. When Andy asks why they call him Red, Freeman delivers the deadpan line, "Maybe it's because I'm Irish." That moment of meta-humor only exists because they cast Freeman and decided to acknowledge the change directly. What started as colorblind casting became one of cinema's most perfect actor-role pairings. Freeman later said Red was the favorite character he'd ever played, despite being offered the role only after Darabont exhausted his initial casting list. Tim Robbins nearly quit before day one. 3 days before principal photography began, Tim Robbins sat in his trailer and contemplated walking away. The pressure of carrying a film, not just any film, but one with this much emotional weight, was crushing him. He'd done comedies, quirky indies, character work, but Andy Dufresne required something different. Stillness, restraint, internal complexity that had to register on camera without big theatrical moments. Robbins felt inadequate. He called his agent. He paced the reformatory grounds. Frank Darabont spent an entire evening talking him through the fear, explaining that Andy's quiet strength was the performance, that restraint was the point. What audiences see as Robbins' masterclass in understated acting almost never happened. His doubt wasn't about talent, it was about trusting that less could be more. The confidence he eventually found shows in every frame, but it was forged through near crisis and a director who refused to let his lead actor surrender to fear. The maggot scene was real. When Brooks feeds his crow Jake, those are actual living maggots he's handling, not props, not clever effects, real maggots, writhing and alive, placed in James Whitmore's aged hands. The production couldn't afford fancy creature effects, so they used what was available, genuine maggots purchased from a bait shop. Whitmore, the seasoned professional, never complained. He simply performed the scene with the same tenderness he brought to every Brooks moment, letting these living creatures crawl across his palms while delivering lines about loneliness and purpose. The crew watched, simultaneously impressed and disturbed, as the elderly actor connected with his feathered co-star using actual insect larvae. It's a small detail, but it represents the production's commitment to authenticity over comfort. Nothing was sanitized or Hollywoodized. If the script called for maggots, they used maggots. That practical, unglamorous approach defined the entire shoot. The beer on the roof scene. Nearly killed someone, the rooftop. Sequence where Andy negotiates for beer appears peaceful in the final cut, sun-drenched men enjoying a rare moment of freedom. But the filming was treacherous. The reformatory's roof was unstable, with loose tiles and questionable structural integrity. Safety coordinators expressed concerns about putting the entire cast up there, but the shot required it. During one take, a crew member nearly fell through a weak section of roofing, catching himself at the last second on a support beam. The incident shut down production for 2 hours while engineers assessed whether they could continue. Darabont insisted on reshooting rather than using stunt doubles or safer angles because he needed the authentic verticality, that sense of being elevated above the prison walls, however temporarily. What reads as serene liberation on screen was captured under conditions that bordered on genuinely dangerous. The men drinking those beers weren't just acting relaxed. They were pretending not to notice how precarious their perch actually was. The movie cost only $25 million. For perspective, True Lies, released the same year, cost $115 million. Forrest Gump ran $55 million. The Shawshank Redemption was made for less than half of Gump's budget, despite spanning decades, featuring elaborate production design and requiring the restoration of an entire reformatory. How? By shooting in Ohio instead of California, which cut costs dramatically. By using the actual reformatory instead of building sets. By keeping the cast relatively small despite the ensemble feel. By having a director willing to problem solve rather than demand expensive solutions. Darabont stretched every dollar, made creative compromises that never feel like compromises on screen, and delivered a film that looks infinitely more expensive than its modest budget. The financial constraints forced innovation. Limited resources meant practical effects, real locations, and actors performing without elaborate safety nets. That scrappy, independent spirit, make it work, make it real, gives the film its authentic texture. The thunder during the lightning scene was fake. When Andy stands in the rain after escaping, arms raised in transcendent freedom, that moment feels cosmically perfect. The lightning, the thunder, the cleansing downpour, nature itself celebrating his liberation. But the thunder was added in post-production. The real storm they filmed in provided rain and lightning. But the thunder wasn't dramatic enough, didn't hit with the emotional punch the scene required. So Thomas Newman's sound team artificially enhanced it, creating thunder that matched the moment's spiritual magnitude rather than meteorological reality. It's a small manipulation, but it reveals how even the film's most real moments were carefully constructed. The authenticity isn't literal, it's emotional. Darabont and his team understood the difference between what actually happened and what truth feels like. That storm sequence captures the essence of freedom, even if the thunder itself was manufactured. Sometimes the biggest truths require the smallest lies. Stephen King sold the rights for $5,000, $5,000. That's what Stephen King accepted for the film, rights to Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. Not because he needed the money. King was already a best-selling author, but because he believed in Frank Darabont. King had a policy of selling rights to his dollar babies, aspiring filmmakers who showed genuine passion for minimal sums. Darabont, who'd written several unproduced screenplays, qualified. Years later, King never cashed the check. He framed it instead, sending it back to Darabont with a note, "In case you ever need bail money." The gesture captures King's generosity and belief in supporting artists over maximizing profit. That $5,000 transaction enabled a film that's generated hundreds of millions in home video sales and remains one of the most watched movies in history. King's willingness to trust a relatively unknown director with his story represents one of literature to film adaptation's most remarkably lopsided, yet ultimately perfect deals. Nobody came to see it in theaters. The Shawshank Redemption opened in September 1994 to empty theaters. Its opening weekend gross was underwhelming. It made just $18 million domestically during its initial theatrical run against that $25 million budget, a commercial failure by every Hollywood metric. The reasons were multiple: confusing title, lack of stars, heavy subject matter, competition from Pulp Fiction and Forrest Gump. Castle Rock tried re-releasing it after the Oscar nominations, hoping for a bump, but the damage was done. What audiences didn't understand was that they were witnessing a film that would eventually become the #1 rated movie on IMDb. A cultural touchstone referenced constantly, a story quoted and beloved worldwide. But in 1994, nobody cared. Darabont watched his passion project the film he'd sacrificed everything to make die quietly in multiplexes. The failure devastated him. He'd made a masterpiece, and America yawned. And go ahead and like and subscribe, because the way this movie found its audience is even more bizarre than how it lost them initially. Ted Turner accidentally made it famous. When Turner Broadcasting acquired Castle Rock Entertainment, they gained rights to The Shawshank Redemption. Turner's various cable networks, TNT, TBS, needed content to fill programming hours. Shawshank, with its uplifting message and lack of explicit content, fit perfectly. They aired it constantly, not occasionally, constantly, multiple times weekly. Viewers stumbled onto it while channel surfing, got hooked by whatever scene happened to be playing, and watched through to the end. Then they'd catch it again the following week. The repetitive cable exposure created a grassroots phenomenon. People who'd never heard of the movie during its theatrical run began quoting it, discussing it, recommending it. Video rental stores noticed the surge and stocked more copies. Turner's decision to essentially program Shawshank on loop wasn't strategic genius. It was content availability meeting airtime needs. But that accidental oversaturation transformed a box office failure into America's favorite movie, one cable viewing at a time. The actual escape scene took 28 days to film. Andy's crawl through 500 yards of sewage, the film's iconic escape sequence, required nearly a month of production. The sewage wasn't real, but it wasn't exactly fake either. The crew created a mixture of chocolate syrup, sawdust, and water that approximated waste without being actual waste. Tim Robbins spent days crawling through this concoction in a specially constructed pipe system built inside the reformatory. The pipe was claustrophobic, barely wider than Robbins's shoulders, and the mixture's smell, even though it wasn't genuine sewage, became overwhelming in the enclosed space. Robbins emerged from each take genuinely exhausted, covered in brown sludge, gasping for air. The physical discomfort wasn't acted, it was real. Between takes, he sat in a shower fully clothed, letting hot water wash away the grime while he mentally prepared for another crawl. The scene's visceral power comes from Robbins' genuine physical ordeal. He didn't pretend to crawl through filth for freedom. He actually did it, take after take, day after day. Brooks's transition scene nearly got cut. The sequence following Brooks' release, his struggle to adapt outside, his eventual suicide tested poorly with early audiences. Studio executives suggested trimming it, arguing the film should focus on Andy and Red rather than this emotional detour. Frank Darabont refused. He understood that Brooks's tragedy wasn't a detour, it was the film's thematic center, the warning about what happens when hope dies. James Whitmore's performance in those scenes is heartbreaking. The confusion at the grocery store, the loneliness in his boarding house, the quiet desperation of the world went and got itself in a big hurry. Darabont fought to keep every frame, arguing that without Brooks' failure, Andy's success means nothing. The studio eventually relented, but the battle illustrated Hollywood's discomfort with darkness. They wanted inspiration without tragedy, hope without consequence. Darabont insisted on both, understanding that real hope only matters when measured against real despair. Brooks stays because he has to. The photo of Andy's wife was the script supervisor's. When Andy shows Red the photograph of his wife, the woman whose death puts him in Shawshank, that's not a hired model or professional actress. It's the production's script supervisor. During pre-production, Darabont realized they needed a specific look. Beautiful, but not Hollywood beautiful, real but photographically compelling. Rather than casting for what amounts to a prop, they used someone already on set. The script supervisor had the right appearance, elegant, timeless, the kind of face that could haunt a man for 20 years. She sat for a 1940s-style portrait session, and that photograph became the tangible representation of everything Andy lost. It's another example of the production's resourcefulness, but it also speaks to the film's commitment to authenticity. Every element, no matter how minor, had to feel real. That photograph needed to seem like something a man in 1947 would actually carry, and hiring a model would have made it look too polished, too professional. The script supervisor's face provided the exact imperfect perfection required. Morgan Freeman's narration was recorded last. Red's voice guides us through Shawshank's story, but Morgan Freeman didn't record most of the narration until after principal photography wrapped. Darabont wanted Freeman to see the cut film, to understand the rhythms and pacing before laying down the final voiceover tracks. Freeman spent days in a recording booth, watching scenes and speaking Red's observations, reflections, and wisdom. The process allowed him to calibrate his delivery to match the edited footage's emotional beats. That's why the narration feels so perfectly integrated. It was literally performed as a response to the finished visuals rather than recorded independently. Freeman's voice became the film's conscience, its philosophical anchor, and his relaxed, contemplative delivery makes even exposition feel profound. Recording the narration last was technically complicated and expensive. Most films do voiceover during production, but Darabont's unconventional approach gave Freeman the context he needed to make Red's voice feel like memory rather than mere description. We're not watching a story, we're being told one by someone who lived it. The warden's safe contained real money. When the warden opens his safe to grab Andy's doctored ledger, those are real bills stacked inside thousands of dollars in genuine currency, provided by the production's accounting department under strict supervision. Using real money solved a practical problem. Fake bills don't photograph correctly. They're too uniform, too obviously props. Real currency has the worn texture, the slight variations in color and wear that cameras pick up. So the production borrowed actual money from the bank, placed it under armed guard on set, filmed the scene, and returned it the same day. Bob Gunton, playing Warden Norton, said, "Handling real money changed his performance subtly. There's a genuine weight to lifting stacks of bills, a tactile reality that affects how you move and interact with the prop. It's another invisible detail that registers subconsciously, making everything feel slightly more authentic. The corruption isn't just thematic, It's photographically real, captured in the texture of actual currency. The movie's title nearly destroyed its success. The Shawshank Redemption is a terrible title for marketing purposes. Test audiences couldn't pronounce Shawshank. They didn't know what it meant. Some thought it was a foreign film. Others assumed it was a horror movie because redemption sounds religious and dark. Castle Rock considered alternatives. Hope Springs Eternal. Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, the original story title. Even just Redemption. Darabont refused every change. He believed the title, despite its commercial challenges, captured something essential about the story's setting and theme. He was probably right artistically and definitely wrong commercially. The confusing title contributed significantly to the film's box office failure. People couldn't remember what it was called, couldn't recommend it effectively to friends. You know, that prison movie with Morgan Freeman, what's it called again? The title that Darabont fought to preserve became an obstacle to success, proving that sometimes artistic integrity and commercial viability genuinely conflict, and choosing art means accepting the consequences. The final beach scene was shot in the U.S. Virgin Islands, that gorgeous coastline where Red finally finds Andy, the turquoise water, white sand, sailboat in the distance. That's the U.S. Virgin Islands, not Mexico. The production couldn't afford to shoot in Zihuatanejo, the actual Mexican location from the story, so they found a Caribbean substitute that could pass for Pacific Coast paradise. The entire sequence was filmed in just 2 days, with Robbins and Freeman meeting on location for the first time since production wrapped. The reunion felt genuine because it was genuine. They hadn't seen each other in weeks, and their joy at being together on that beach, finally free of the reformatory's oppressive atmosphere, registers in every frame. The location swap is invisible to audiences, but it represents the film's constant problem solving. How do you create authenticity when you can't afford the real thing? By finding alternatives that capture emotional truth rather than literal accuracy. That beach isn't where Stephen King placed it, but it feels exactly right, and in cinema, feeling matters more than geography. The film's composer cried recording the score. Thomas Newman, while conducting the orchestra for the film's final scenes, broke down in tears. The combination of music, memory of the footage, and emotional exhaustion from weeks of composition overwhelmed him. He stopped conducting, stepped away from the podium, and needed several minutes to compose himself before they could continue. The musicians sat quietly, understanding they were creating something special. Newman's score, with its delicate piano, soaring strings, and understated emotional manipulation, doesn't announce itself like typical film music. It whispers rather than shouts, supporting the story without overwhelming it. But the restraint required enormous emotional investment from Newman, who had to access profound feeling while maintaining compositional discipline. His tears during recording weren't theatrical. They were the release of someone who'd spent months channeling hope, despair, and redemption through music. That vulnerability transferred into the score itself, which remains one of cinema's most emotionally resonant soundtracks precisely because it feels like it cost the composer something to create. The cast didn't think they'd made something special. During the wrap party, the prevailing mood was satisfaction but not triumph. They'd made a good movie, everyone felt that, but a masterpiece. A film that would define careers and touch millions. Nobody sensed that. Tim Robbins thought it was solid work. Morgan Freeman appreciated the script and his role, but had no sense of its future impact. The crew packed up equipment and moved on to next jobs. Darabont felt proud, but also anxious about the commercial prospects. There wasn't a champagne cork-popping celebration or sense of having created something for the ages, just professionals completing a project they believed in, hopeful it would find an audience, unaware they'd made what would become IMDb's top-rated film. That humility is almost tragic in retrospect. They had no idea what they'd accomplished. The recognition came slowly, years later, as cable airings and word of mouth built the film's reputation. By then, they'd scattered to other projects, only gradually realizing they'd been part of something that would outlive them all. When Rob Reiner offered Frank Darabont $3 million for the rights to the Shawshank Redemption, Darabont was living in a small apartment, surviving on ramen noodles and hope, watching his friends buy houses and start families while he chased screenwriting dreams. $3 million would change everything. Financial security for life. Proof to everyone who doubted him. A clean exit from poverty. Reiner would have made an excellent film. His track record with Stephen King was proven, and Darabont had never directed anything longer than a short film. The sensible choice, the safe choice, the choice every advisor recommended was taking the money. Darabont sat across from Reiner in a meeting room, listened to the offer, and said no in under 2 minutes, not because he was brave or visionary, but because he understood something fundamental. You only get one chance to tell your story your way, and no amount of money compensates for surrendering that chance. That 2-minute decision created the film we know, preserved Darabont's vision intact, and proved that sometimes the most important choices are the ones where you refuse the easier path. The Shawshank Redemption succeeded by failing first. It flopped in theaters, struggled to find its identity, and nearly didn't get made at all. But that struggle, the rejection, the poverty budgets, the compromises that weren't really compromises, forged something more authentic than a well-funded, studio-supported production ever could have achieved. We love it, not despite its difficult birth, but because of it. Every frame carries the weight of people who believed in something when nobody else did. So hit that subscribe button, because hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies, especially not when it's captured on film. Hope was never imprisoned. It was just waiting for the right moment to break free.